Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cloud Academy's webinar, What Does the Future Hold for Cloud Computing? My name is John Chell. I'm the Assessment Lead with Cloud Academy. A few quick notes regarding our webinar today. This webinar is being recorded, so for any attendees who cannot hear the entire presentation, we will be sending a link to the entire recording to everyone who registered to attend. Cloud Academy's webinar recordings are available within a matter of days after they air. We will have time for questions at the end of our session. With that out of the way, we have three members of Cloud Academy's content team joining me here today. Let me introduce them. First, Matt Martinez, Cloud Content and Labs Engineer. Hello, Matt.
Hey, John, happy to be here.
Next, we have Stuart Scott, our AWS Content and Cloud Security Lead. Hello, Stuart.
Hi, John.
And finally, Cloud Academy's VP of Content, Andrew Larkin. Hello, Andy.
Hello, John. Happy to be here. Let's get started.
So today we're going to discuss and analyze some of the leading cloud topics circulating in the ether as the future of cloud computing. One aspect that gets raised a lot in discussion is multi-cloud. So let's start there. Stu, what does multi-cloud really mean, and is 2020 the year it becomes more than a buzzword?
Okay, it's a good question, John. And if we look at the past decade, much of the focus has been on the transition to the cloud from on-premise data centers. So if we think back to 2010, cloud adoption was nowhere near as high as it is today. And much of that was down to lack of knowledge and understanding and security concerns. Organizations back then didn't really fully understand how the data would be protected, and so they obviously found it hard to take the initial steps of a cloud migration journey. And that fear was fully justified, to be fair. 10 years ago, the cloud was still very new to many of us. Now, if we fast forward to today, perceptions and mindsets of organizations have changed dramatically. Awareness, understanding, and visibility of the benefits and rewards to be obtained by utilizing the cloud is far more widespread, and it's actually interesting to see how some of these initial concerns, for example, security that I mentioned, is now actually a driving factor for cloud adoption. Organizations can now see and understand the highly sophisticated security toolsets, techniques, and technologies that are available in the cloud, which have been developed this past decade to protect data, which offers a simplified management to an enterprise's overall security posture. So going back to the point, John, we can see evidence of a cloud knowledge baseline forming within the industry, which allows organizations to gain confidence and experiment more with developing their cloud architecture from infrastructure to platform and to a software perspective. So people are now making full use of the new technologies and services that are being released by the top cloud vendors. Experience, knowledge, and trust in vendors have all played a part in getting us this far. So as the top cloud vendors are pushing boundaries of capabilities, people are seeing the different offerings that these vendors provide and are looking to build their solutions and environments in a multi-cloud architecture. With this in mind, I think that over the next few years, multi-cloud adoption will also be on the rise, and I think the cloud vendors may even make this easier for us to do so. We saw signs of this when GCP released Anthos, which lets you manage and run workloads across other cloud vendors such as Azure and AWS. And this makes it significantly easier to build solutions spanning multiple clouds and even across your own data center as well, without the need to have teams of developers building across different platforms and navigating multiple APIs.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Stu and John. Like, I've got a report here from CIO Dive, and they outline in their 5 cloud trends that they believe hybrid multi-cloud is the predominant strategy, and companies are really doubling down on it. Well, look, I'm not totally sold on the doubling down aspect, but yes, I am expecting a lot more multi-cloud solutions this year due to one factor, and that factor is Microsoft, Microsoft, Microsoft. And more importantly, I think the Microsoft customer agreement, which Microsoft quietly rolled out in 2019, and that new licensing program makes it easier for customers to buy Azure direct from Microsoft rather than having to go via an enterprise agreement or, most importantly, via the partner ecosystem. AKA, it's a massive pivot in the market from Microsoft, who have literally owned this enterprise space by driving sales through their massive partner ecosystem. So yeah, I think there's going to be a large shift to options. You're going to have more choice, but I'm not expecting a deluge, right? I think it'll be a slow and steady refactoring as server licenses and applications reach end of life. And existing Microsoft customers can start to buy direct and initiate cloud projects on Azure infrastructure. And that is a really big thing. So if you're an existing Microsoft customer, now is the time to dive in and embrace cloud and get that digital transformation program kickstarted. And I mean, if you're a developer or a sysadmin, now's the time to start your Azure journey because you will be in hot demand. And look at it. If we look at this sort of in a broad stroke, just stepping back for a minute, according to Forrester research, only 1/5 of enterprise applications run in the cloud currently. So only 1 in 5 business applications is running in the cloud today. At year 14 of the cloud, I mean, that implies that. Is that right? I mean, it seems like that's a very low number, right? And it implies that there are still a lot of applications out there running in data centers, on co-locations, and on-prem. So no, that doesn't surprise me, okay? Microsoft have always owned that big enterprise space. And Microsoft servers have historically run a large chunk of those enterprise business applications. And I think that historic dependence on .NET, Windows servers especially, SQL Server and the Office suite has made that shift to cloud seem like a migration just a little bit too far for most enterprise customers. Now, in 2020, with Azure offering the depth and support and services and literally that pay-as-you-go promise, I think it's a real option for those 4 out of 5 enterprise customers who have held off refactoring those big legacy applications because they were tied to an enterprise licensing agreement, or doing that meant they would have to move everything to AWS. I mean, let's be frank. If your application teams are often stretched razor thin, right? There's not enough budget in the business to keep adding members. Everyone's head down, just trying to keep the lights on. And if you've got time to commit 100% of all your effort to rewriting a primary business app to use on cloud infrastructure, you'd be very, very lucky. So it's almost like less attractive if it means you have to stop using all the products that you've been brought up with, SQL Server, Microsoft Dynamics, and look to move to things like DynamoDB or Redshift. I mean, if all you've known is the Microsoft stack, that just looks a little bit too difficult when you've got a full-on day job. But now, look at Microsoft. It's running with scissors, basically. Azure DevOps has matured leaps and bounds, and Azure is the fastest growing platform right now. Look, take a look at this chart here. We've got Azure outflanking AWS and GCP in enterprise scale cloud adoption. Now that's a pretty big difference. And to me, that says that blue river of customer is coming. And Goldman Sachs found Azure is the most popular choice for infrastructure as a service. And Goldman Sachs anticipates Azure will outpace AWS by number of infrastructure as a service workloads in the next 3 years. Hello? That's a major change. As an AWS guy, I am quite surprised to see that. Azure remains the dominant platform as a service choice ahead of Salesforce and AWS. Well, okay, that's a big change in the market in my view. So I think we'll see people start to just drift towards Azure, which gives them the opportunity to do more, okay? And my take on this is that business customers are preferring Azure because now they can buy Azure direct. They can build out around their enterprise hosting deals without having to refactor all their code. And to me, that says, yes, we will see a number of cloud applications go up. The number will continue to go up. And yes, we will see more multi-cloud solutions. Why? Because once the infrastructure moves to Azure, it's easier to start building services around those core business apps. Teams get confidence. They can start to experiment using some of the AWS and GCP services. Now, I don't think it'll be a deluge, as migration is still going to be the biggest challenge, and it continues to be. It's that slow corporate buy-in, that lack of executive support, and probably all those 10-year contract agreements out there that seemed like a great idea 9 years ago, but there will be more appetite in the business teams this year, is my take on this. That's what I think about multi-cloud.
Thanks, Andy. There is one topic I wanted to just raise regarding multi-cloud and portability, and Kubernetes, which is a market leader in container orchestration, obviously, and a key service in the trends towards multi-cloud. each of the cloud services offers a managed Kubernetes service. So a key concern for those considering Kubernetes or containers in general is resource isolation, or making sure your applications are truly isolated and secure from other apps and users on that multi-tenant hardware.
Mm-hmm.
So opinions and documented practices vary. Looking at the documentation, you'll see a lot of different points of view depending on who it's coming from. The major cloud providers seem to agree that a hypervisor is essential for true security in the public cloud, but container providers also offer different methods to achieve isolation. So that's a little bit confusing. And the question I have is, what would we advise to those in the market reviewing all of these service options and trying to make the best decision?
That's a great question, John. So one of the major concerns for anyone looking to move into the cloud has always been, that security aspect. And in fact, it was and still is one of the greatest barriers for a lot of people when it comes to, making that decision to make that leap and migrate to the cloud from something like an on-premises data center, especially back when the cloud first became a thing and the cloud knowledge level for the average tech company was a lot lower than it is now. It's true for running things like Kubernetes clusters on multi-tenant hardware that you should trust the level of isolation that hypervisor provides more than any other kind of level or security measure. I'd say that one of the greatest responsibilities, though, and one of the greatest considerations for anyone looking to make that jump is to just develop kind of a deep understanding of the shared responsibility model for your cloud provider, including any security concerns there are on both sides of the fence, including things that your provider is responsible for, things that you're responsible for, and how to mitigate those. That can seem overwhelming, but the good news is, that being said, as containers continue to grow as one of the most widely adopted solutions out there, and as cloud providers update their services accordingly, I expect not only the security, but also the portability and the ease of use aspect of cloud-based container and Kubernetes solutions to kind of continue to evolve and to do that quickly. So, for example, in the last year, Azure announced that the Azure Kubernetes service was the fastest growing compute service in Azure's history.
Wow.
AWS announced Fargate support for EKS and something else called Enhanced Elastic Network Interface Trunking for containers, which, all of these features just make it a lot easier to efficiently manage resources and to get into kind of a container-based solution. And these are just a few of the many container-centric updates that have been released by some of these major cloud providers. So this goes to show that the big players in the cloud recognize that people value containers. And as they continue to be more heavily adopted, that demand is just going to lead to more features that support them, which in turn is going to create even more interest for new teams looking to jump into the cloud. And there's a lot of momentum here, so I don't expect that this cycle is going to show any sign of slowing down anytime soon. On another note, earlier we talked about multi-cloud architecture. So as large cloud providers continue to evolve their ability to allow customers to really tailor their infrastructure between multiple providers, and as more and more people adopt a multi-cloud kind of ideology, the most portable solution for serving some of these applications is often going to become one of the most viable options for testing different multi-cloud setups. I think containers have their work cut out for them for a long time, as they become sort of the central, most easily movable piece around which people start to plan the rest of their infrastructure. For people running on-premises or legacy applications, moving to containers is going to be a major selling point, and I think container knowledge is going to become a requirement for a lot of people moving forward.
Yep.
So I guess just to kind of wrap up for containers for the foreseeable future, while there are other methodologies like serverless that are going to continue to expand, the paradigm shift required for someone running like a legacy application or something is low enough comparatively to a lot of these alternatives that they're going to stay an essential part of a lot of stacks for the time being.
Yeah, you just can't go wrong. Go Stu.
I was just going to say, I think you're right, Matt. Having container knowledge and like Kubernetes knowledge is going to be fundamental in helping you make that multi-cloud migration. Because, like I say, it's one of the easiest parts to move between clouds. So having that as a foundation will be great.
Yeah, portable skill, and it opens up a whole lot of opportunities, in your current roles and, for new roles. I think it's one of those it's almost the new standard.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
Well, we still got quite a few things to cover, so I would just want to move on to our next topic. Something else experts repeatedly mentioned is edge computing. Now I was wondering, could anyone walk us through, what that is and what the future holds for edge computing?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I can take this. Edge computing, that's a massive topic in itself, so I won't go on too long with this. But essentially, edge computing isn't really a new term or technology. It's been around for a long time. And most people can relate to edge computing in the cloud with services such as Amazon CloudFront, which is a content delivery network. Now, for those unaware of Amazon CloudFront, it essentially provides a means of distributing traffic closer to end users requesting content via an edge location as cache data, which helps to reduce latency, which is very important for certain solutions. Now, these edge locations are essentially physical AWS sites that are deployed in major cities and highly populated areas across the globe. Fundamentally, edge computing is the means by which processing of data occurs near or as close to the source data as feasibly possible. Now, cloud technology has effectively centralized almost the entire IT infrastructure that you need into a cloud vendor's data center where the processing of your data genuinely occurs. And this is great and works well for most workloads. However, when latency is critical to your solution or service that you are providing to your customers or your business, this centralized processing can be somewhat ineffective, especially when your customer base might be geographically placed in a significant distance from the end user or indeed end device, for example, a device such as the Amazon Echo or Google Home family. In these instances, edge computing is used to process the data request at the source, which significantly reduces latency for critical requests. And this prevents the request from having to communicate back to the centralized data center, which could be in an entirely different country. And I'm sure any online multiplayer gamers out there appreciate how important a low latency connection is. So by performing local processing of data, it also helps to reduce bandwidth requirements across an internet connection, as only the refined data that has already been locally processed may need to be sent back to a centralized database running somewhere in an AWS availability zone somewhere. Now, more and more devices, and we see this a lot with IoT devices, have capabilities to process this data locally for latency and bandwidth performance efficiencies. And I see cloud vendors across the board honing in on making further advances within the edge computing space, making it easier, quicker, and more secure to create solutions which bring processing closer to source data and requests. And we've already seen evidence of this with AWS as they have expanded their already successful serverless service, AWS Lambda, by introducing Lambda at Edge. And this is a fully managed service that allows you to run code closer to users who are using your application via Amazon CloudFront, which I mentioned earlier, without having to deploy or manage any additional infrastructure. And I see this kind of technology and functionality growing over the coming years due to its operational efficiency and performance enhancements.
Thanks, Stu. Lambda Edge leads into another area I wanted to mention, which is serverless computing. Now, serverless technology emerged in 2014, which may seem like a long time ago in cloud terms, but I was surprised to see how often it was mentioned in something that experts thought would continue to grow in the next few years. But as I was considering it, it makes a lot of sense. The reason for the growth is that it harnesses the scalability of the cloud, allowing users to scale quickly when necessary, and then scale down to zero when there is no demand. A large fraction of serverless architecture is event-driven, which also offers cost savings by truly leveraging the pay-as-you-go capability of the cloud. And it allows developers to focus on their design and code and leverages the cloud provider's ability to manage resources and security. So
yeah, I love it, John. I'm just thinking here, it goes straight back to the idea of Werner Vogel's, all things distributed. I mean, that's kind of like, that's Werner's own personal blog. And in that, he's always driven this idea of distributed computing. And I think, Lambda is, the very manifestation of that ideology. But it comes with a lot of challenges as well, right? Because now we've got a lot of distributed code. We've got, it's not so easy to manage. There's little areas where, you have to be perhaps a little bit more diligent and have a little bit more rigor with how you manage, code and especially DevOps. So there's advantages and the disadvantages. What do you think of the advantages?
Well, I think, as enterprises are moving from cloud migration to the optimization stage, the clear advantage is that it's going to offer cost savings because it allows people to just really accentuate the pay-as-you-go benefits. And in addition to that, you're going to be moving into an architecture where the cloud provider should be handling a lot of the day-to-day management in terms of the backend and allowing you to focus on the code.
Yeah.
With these advantages, I can see why it's expected to grow as the cloud matures. But I think some of the disadvantages are something we should discuss as well.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Because it hasn't really taken off as fast as I think we all expected. Here was this revolutionary way of running compute, and it all seemed so incredibly possible. Yet we don't really see a lot of it hasn't taken over the world basically. So let's look
there
at
was a
some of these.
massive drive initially when it first came out. Because like you say, it was a revolution. There was a huge drive, but the kind of talk on it has come down somewhat. And like you say, you don't hear too much about it now. Maybe it's because it's more the norm and it's not new anymore, or it's just not as widespread as expected.
Yeah, I think there's also a real gap in skills. Like it's an entirely different way of thinking and designing, and I think the skill set needed for that is just it's not there yet. So that's an opportunity, I think, for teams, individuals to just start learning all of the services, all the functions that you can run within these managed services. And as John said, a lot of the let's say the operational management of code at scale is taken care of for you by Lambda and other distributed platforms. So now's the time to get in there and just start really leveraging these tools and find out how you can start to build applications at scale using them. Skills is obviously the biggest one, I think. Any others? Anyone got any other thoughts on it?
Well, the only thing I would say is that if people are looking at serverless, a lot of people would see Lambda and Azure Functions as serverless, but that's only one aspect of it. There's more than just the event-driven Lambda functions. There's also kind of less intimidating entry points like Google App Engine and Beanstalk and Azure App Services.
Yeah.
And those are kind of, I think, like that if you're looking to optimize, but want perhaps less of a headache or less of a heart attack in terms of restructuring your existing architecture, that might be a good first step.
Yeah. I remember step functions really lifted the game because we all rushed at Lambda and started writing a lot of functions, and you suddenly went, holy cow, like how do I manage all this? I've now got like 20 or 30 routines, and it's very difficult to manage all those. And so the whole idea of having cascade events, with step functions suddenly made it a lot more procedural, I think, and that helped a lot. But yeah, the complexity is still there. And while I think, all of the platforms provide a lot of, really granular services to help you manage, distributed code, there's still a lot of thinking that needs to go into it. And I think it is slightly intimidating. Even going back to that sort of head down developer team, just trying to keep the lights on, every day is a struggle. No one's got the time to say, hey, let's just stop what we're doing and start refactoring our entire stack to use this amazing new technology.
It'd be nice if we could.
Yeah. So I think that's always going to be a little bit of a challenge. Yeah.
Well, now that we've talked about serverless, one other topic that came up pretty frequently was big data and data analytics. Did anyone have any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure everyone's got some thoughts on this, but from what I've seen within the industry and from what I've heard when I've spoken to different customers, I can vaguely summarize that the term big data became a lot more prevalent in cloud and has become a huge buzzword over the past few years. And this might be down to the fact that cloud vendors have developed new services and technology to help you manage and ingest a colossal amount of data that can be collated and gathered from a number of different sources and mechanisms. And typically, this data is absorbed by these services in an unstructured data format, ready to be processed and organized in a meaningful way that makes sense to your own business. So a rush began. Organizations finally had the capabilities to log and store literally everything via cloud services without having to worry about server provisioning, while at the same time paying for very low storage cost solutions. And it became a no-brainer to many organizations out there. Some of them didn't know what they were going to do with all that data, but that didn't matter at this stage. It was better to have too much data than not enough. So now we're in a situation where many organizations are trying to understand what to do with this data. And this is where data analytics comes in. Data analytics and big data are often interchanged in conversation, but I see them as very different things. So big data, I see, can be seen as the process of gathering, collecting, and storing massive data sets of raw data, whereas data analytics can provide a way of gaining insight and understanding of what the data you collected via the big data process can provide to you as a business. And using analytic functions, you can review your data both historically and in real time to filter and identify any data that's relevant to your business needs. So now I tend to hear more focus on data analytics and big data. And I think it's because people want to understand at a very granular level what their data can tell them and how to use that data to better their business to aid performance, lower cost, and essentially return better outcomes. As technology changes across cloud computing, we as end users are becoming bombarded with more and more data, which is becoming easier and easier to store, categorize, and manage. But we need more services to help us understand what we're actually seeing within this data. Now, of course, there are many data analytics tools and cloud partners out there that specialize in this area, and I see this area growing more and more as data capturing becomes more accessible to all via the cloud.
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting. Like data is not going to go away, but
No.
I do think there's a lot of confusion and almost a reluctance around what you can do with data, and specifically around what artificial intelligence offers. And actually, is what artificial intelligence offers really a good thing? We've got things like AWS SageMaker Suite. It's so easy to use now, and both AWS and GCP have really democratized data science. But I just can't help thinking that artificial intelligence demonizes data a bit. Facial recognition, privacy issues, the whole
Yeah.
thing about robots taking over. It seems like people are a little bit reluctant to get into it.
Right.
And that's a bit of I'm very interested to see how this year pans out. If we look at HelpNet Securities predictions, I'll just pull them up here on screen. Okay, so they've done some customer research, and here's what they've found: that 74% of organizations named data security as their top IT priority for 2020. And I look at this and I think, yeah, okay, why data security and not data science? It's almost a very defensive position on data, isn't it, to say data security? It's like saying data is a threat rather than an enabler. And as you were saying, Stu, I think data automation is going to happen anyway. So as a business, you need to be across it and you need to be in it. So get those skills now so that at the very least, you are always data aware. And I think actionable analytics should be the priority right now. Like data to help you improve your service and satisfaction levels, customer satisfaction levels. Data security should simply be a given. That's absolutely what we should all be doing. And I'm a little bit concerned that that's like the number one priority for a lot of IT teams. It feels very inwardly focused. So I'm hoping that we'll see a lot more, customers embrace what we can do with data and how it can help them drive better customer experiences. And again, if you've started to look into this area and you're curious, now is the time to get into it, because you have these skills and you will just become, the hot property in your organization. Because I do think we're all sitting on the cusp of something big here. It's going to happen anyway. Like, it's not that we're suddenly going to say, no, artificial intelligence, not a good idea, let's stop doing it. It's
Right.
going to be there, so you might as well be at the forefront of it. And if you're in a business team, then start to think about how these really, really established services like SageMaker can help you just get started without you having to be a data scientist. And I think that's the cusp of the wave here. And I'm really hoping that we see a lot of people embrace this, and we see a lot of good results. But yeah, I find it very interesting, because I think the whole big data term, what's next? Massive data? Is it really big data? Like, it just doesn't seem to have any resonance, does it? And I think we're all sort of struggling with what data is, and let's get into using it.
Yeah, it's crazy that data security is still the hot topic, but that's what ends up in the news, isn't it? I mean, nobody wants to be on the front page for allowing everybody's confidential information to get out there, and that's what, I think that's the hot wire that nobody wants to touch. I mean, if you're putting public buckets out there, you're going to get in trouble for it.
Yeah, but precisely, like, here's where it's an opportunity, not a threat, because if you're trying to manage your own level of, high security on an on-premise or co-located environment, that's actually a massive ask. And to try and beat or make compliance requirements takes a huge investment, especially if you're running a relatively small stack. Whereas if you do use cloud providers, they give you that assurance out of the box. So obviously, there's a layer of expertise that's needed to ensure that the right processes are put in place. And I think
Right.
there's absolutely a focus on that. So it's business practice, but that security per se, I think you get a way more security with a cloud provider than you'll ever get trying to do it yourself. So I
Definitely.
think that should be an opportunity. People should be, leveraging that opportunity.
Thanks, Andy. Before we move on, there is one statistic I came across, and I just had to mention it here, and that is that apparently data scientists still spend roughly 80% of their time cleaning data and preparing it, and that leaves at most 20% in terms of analyzing data. And I was really surprised to see that. I know that I saw similar stats from articles published in 2016, and somehow I thought the numbers had improved. But it seems that they've been pretty much holding it at 80-20. And a lot of people are predicting that that's going to be changed by some silver bullet within the next few years. I don't know if anybody has any opinions on that, but I mean, if we haven't really been able to move the dial and make it easier for people to clean data within the last 5 or so years, I don't know what it's going to take, and I'm kind of skeptical that there's going to be any kind of one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah, no, I kind of, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, you would think at, where we are today, that would be the easiest thing. And, I can't help thinking we haven't solved that problem. So while, the SageMaker suite gives you a lot of functionality, there is still a lot of manual work to be done with, loading and processing data. And maybe we'll see some, perhaps a little more ease of use popping up around, Microsoft Dynamics, which has actually been
I
quite
think we
good.
can definitely expect that aspect to become easier and easier.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it just surprised me. I would think that all the cloud providers out there would see that as a big need and something that the first one to the table with a solution is going to reap a lot of benefits. Um, but with how complicated data is and the variety of sources and formats, I mean, it makes sense why it's so difficult to solve.
yeah, and it's also kept data in that kind of black box, that only data scientists can ever understand this, and it's very, very difficult. And I think, yeah, we really do need to start having everybody understand, simple routines like, using Python, pandas and NumPy and things like that. There's easy ways of doing things. But yeah, I agree. I think we need to have a cloud service which just, basically does all the loading for you. And as the data sets get larger and larger and the complexity of them goes up and up, we're kind of almost creating a
Yeah,
problem here.
we're starting to see a lot of that with SageMaker Suite already. A lot of these services that are announced at reInvent kind of takes a lot of the pressure off you, and it really helps you to kind of get into machine learning and AI a lot quicker than you ever could before.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a good time to get into it for sure.
yeah. The
Yeah, that's what I was going
visualization
to pitch
tools.
in.
Yeah, go, Matt.
Oh, no, please go ahead, Andy.
I think the visualization tools, have got stronger, but yeah, the actual loading and processing tools have not. So yeah, I think there's a big gap there. What are you thinking, Matt?
Oh, I was just going to agree with Stu there. Thanks to advances in technology like SageMaker, while we haven't saw the 80/20 split yet, I think due to a lot of really cool abstractions provided by some advances in that technology, that 20% is a lot more efficient than it used to be. So, I think despite not having a solution to, clean all that data, it's still going to attract more and more people who are, willing to put in the time to clean their data, because that 20% is going to go a lot farther than it used to.
Yeah. Yep.
Let's move on to another subject, which would be automation and security. Stu, as our security lead, why don't you take this one?
So, to be honest, I think anyone who is remotely familiar with cloud computing could predict that both automation and security is going to continue to play a massive part over the future of the cloud. And we've already touched on a number of these points so far in this webinar. I mean, automation should be bred into the foundation of cloud solutions. And with so many services out there now that offer some form of automation, there isn't really much of a reason why applications should be designed and architected without automation in mind. Automation offers so many benefits, and I'm not going to list them all as many are self-explanatory, but one of the main reasons automation should be used is the drastic reduction of operational resources required to perform the same functions. Not forgetting that with automation, tasks are carried out instantly and in a predictable manner. And if you're using humans to do a lot of this, it's not always instant and it's not always predictable. So automation is great. Now, security has always and will always be a top priority to both cloud vendors and customers of the cloud. A vendor can't afford to have its reputation destroyed by a lack of robust and effective security controls to help customers manage and protect their environments and data, in addition to the security of the cloud itself. For example, the physical security of the vendor's own data centers. Due to this, cloud vendors will have a far higher level of security protecting their systems than you or I would have in our own organizations. And I think you touched on that earlier, Andy. And to prove this, the vendors publish their certifications and compliance programs that cover worldwide regulations, which most of us just wouldn't be able to feasibly achieve in our own organizations. Security controls exist to protect us and our data from malicious intent from both internal and external threats. And there's new threats and weaknesses that are being discovered every day, especially as technology evolves and enhancements are made. New threats can be cooked up by those with malicious intent. Now, this constant chicken and egg means that new security services and features also have to be added to the long list of security offerings that already exist to protect us against these new threats. Now, as a result, automation and security come hand in hand. You need a way to automate the discovery of a potential new vulnerability that has occurred within your infrastructure, in addition to an automated way of mitigating that same threat with an automated response of corrective action. In fact, every point that we've already touched on so far in this webinar, all the points that have been made by everyone, I think we've probably mentioned security and perhaps automation, all of them. Multi-cloud, edge computing, data analytics, they all have elements of both automation and security shrouded around them. And this goes to show how fundamental both automation and security is. And it's because of this that it will continue to be a key factor of cloud computing for many, many years to come. And people have become more accepting of performing less administrative and operational actions as they get a service or feature, because they can get a service or feature to do it for them for cheaper and more effectively and more predictably. And this took a shift in mindset initially, as there was an initial worry that when automation came about, and we spoke about Lambda and serverless earlier, which all helps with that, it would soon make people's own job redundant. That was the kind of mindset that was at first come about. And although this may be true in some unfortunate circumstances, but in others, it offered a great opportunity to grow. And this kind of moves on to a whole new topic of cloud adoption and migration and how it affects a business internally. So I won't dive into into that now. I'll leave that for another webinar for another day.
Very well
Thanks.
put, Stu. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
yeah, very well put.
I just want to say, with obviously security is another area, just like data analytics and big data, where there's obviously a constant need for education. Um,
Yeah, so I mean that's probably the big trend for 2020 is, it's a personal journey. You've got to get yourself across these new technologies, start to embrace them, take a lead rather than the back seat, because the more you know, the more valuable you are, and the more effective you'll be. So I think it's a really, really big year for us as practitioners. 2020 is the decade of learning. It's time to get across these technologies that you've been seeing in the market. Perhaps you've been hearing about them and hearing about them today, thinking, yeah, I should get into that. Now is the time. Like, seize it with both hands. And I think for
Especially
business
some of the ones
customers,
I've already mentioned, like Kubernetes, containers, automation, security. If you're not sure where to start, there's some great areas to dive into. Machine learning, data analytics, all those kind of big categories that are high profile in the industry right now.
yeah, yeah, we've got some good start points for you. And if you've got a team that's looking to move to, you've been talking about digital transformation for a long time. Now's the time to start that journey. It's become real, so it's time for everybody to just get up to speed as quickly as you can, and make the most of these new services. I think containers. I think I'd choose containers, Stu. What do you think? Like, if you're up with containers, you can pretty much run anything.
Yeah,
Obviously,
pretty
security.
much, mate. And that encompasses your multi-cloud, it encompasses your security, automation. It kind of all amalgamates into one area. So yeah, if you can nail containers, then you're doing well.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Well, we're going to open up for some questions, but before we begin taking questions, I wanted to mention that Cloud Academy is designed to help organizations train their IT departments. We offer courses, hands-on labs, and exams on AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, as well as the many topics and specialties we've discussed: serverless, containers, security, and data science. Our training resources will help any organization prepare and stay up to date as it manages resources in the cloud. With that, why don't we look at some of the questions we've received?
I've got one here. Just what is the difference between the new what is the new Microsoft customer agreement, and what's the difference between that and the enterprise licensing? Okay, so the best place to start for that is obviously the Microsoft site. So in March, they rolled out this Microsoft customer agreement, which basically is a one-to-one relationship that you have with Microsoft. So you basically can buy direct through this. It replaces the Microsoft Cloud Agreement, which was the MCA, and the underlying agreement for that, I think, was the CSP, which is the Cloud Solution Provider relationship. So, if you haven't had any news on this, look on the Microsoft site. You may find it's quite easy just to start buying pay as you go using Azure services, and it might just be the kickstart you need in your business to get going with this stuff. Oh, I've got one other question, John. Someone's asked, where's a good place to start with containers? Matt, can you recommend any learning paths or labs or something?
Oh, fantastic. Well, yeah, we've got several learning paths and tailored labs for people to get started right on cloudacademy.com. So, I'd suggest get started with a learning path, and as soon as, you start to feel comfortable kind of moving around on your own, I would definitely jump into some of our labs where you'll be able to, practice some of this stuff in real time, in a real environment.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on our webinar today. What does the future hold for cloud computing? I just want to take a moment to thank everyone on the call: Stuart, Matt, Andy, myself. We're all happy to be presenting here for you today. And we look forward to future presentations in the future.